it's Joe here from Joe's Country Junction, and I'm here today to show you my little baby quilt I did for my granddaughter. If you watch and you check out video, Sew with Joe video number 7, I think it is, I showed how I did the letters to make this quilt. And so it's just simple. Her mom requested that I make a doll quilt for her birthday. She's very into her little baby doll. She calls her little baby doll Titi. I don't know if that was originally how she said baby, but that's how Georgia says her doll's name is Titi. So we just go with it. So today I've been meaning to show you all a binding video because I've had lots of requests for a binding video. And being I had a small project to bind, I thought this would be a perfect time to do a binding video. I am going to try my best and do my best to show you how I do it, but I'm warning you in advance. I have to put the camera right here in order for you to see down. Can you see down here into where the needle is? And so in order to do that, I can't see very well where I'm sewing because the camera is right in the way of my view of seeing the needle. So I'm going to do the best I can to prevent me from running my finger over with a sewing machine and still be able to give you a good view of the camera, and so that you can see the needle and how I'm doing the machine binding. But I machine bind everything. I know a lot of people enjoy the process of hand binding. I have just not been that person. I am a cross stitcher and I love cross stitching. So when I am going to take the time to sit on the couch and do some relaxing, I prefer to do cross stitching versus binding. And so that's why I have learned to machine bind. So come along and this will probably be the last time you see my face. So you'll probably be just seeing the picture of the machine and the needle as I do my work on the machine, on the quilt. So here we go. I'm awkwardly sitting at my machine because that's what I have to do in order to film this. It's really quite unusual to be sitting like this. And one of the first questions that I get is I get asked how big I cut my strips. I've been doing this for a long time. I like a narrow binding. And so I cut my strips, probably about 2 1/4 inches to 2 1/8 inches. But I recommend, if you're going to try this for the first time, that you probably cut your binding strips at 2 1/2 inches. So to start out with, this quilt is small. I cut 4 binding strips. I'll probably only need 3, but I'll just throw the leftovers in the scrap bin. It's okay. I'm trying to situate this so that I can let you see. First off, with right sides together, to do binding, I just do this. I laid the one over the other, kind of making a right angle. You can see one comes this way, one comes this way. And so I'm just making my right angle. And I'm using my Seam So Easy guide. And I have this little spot right on the center line. And I just aim that right into the needle like that. And I connect all my pieces together like that. And so you can see that I have my seam here. And then I would just take my scissors and I would cut like this and like this. Then this would get taken to the ironing board and this seam would be pressed open. And so it would be pressed open like this. And then at that point, I would do that to I would join all of the binding strips and I would press all of the binding strips that I would need to do my quilt. So now let's see if we can get the binding put onto the quilt. So here we go. I have the end. You need to make sure that you fold it right sides together, or fold it wrong sides together, sorry. And I'm going to see if I can get this quilt under here. Oh, I'm glad this is a little quilt. Okay, I'm going to start right, I don't know, about 12 inches from the corner is what I'm doing here. And you can start anywhere. And a lot of people iron their binding strips. I've been doing this so long, I don't do that anymore, but a lot of people do. And so feel free to iron your binding strips. It's just a step that I have chose to ignore. And so I leave a tail. You can see here I've got, maybe a 3-4 inch tail. And then I start sewing the binding down. I need to get my threads out. Okay, come on, little thread. There. Okay, so I'm trying to hold everything together, and you can see. Yep. I wanted to make sure the camera angle stayed the same. Okay. This is probably a little noisy for you all. I'm just laying this binding strip right at the edge of the quilt. And I'm putting the binding strip goes on the top of the quilt. I'm coming up here and I'm going to hit this corner. You can see the corners right here. Maybe you can't, I don't know. Okay, so I'm coming along and I'm stopping here. I'm about 1/4 inch from the corner. And so I'm going to take the quilt out of the machine. And I'm going to turn it this way in preparation to turn and start sewing this way. So to do this, it's kind of tricky if you've never done this before. If you've bound quilts before, you do this the exact same way. So this gets folded over and up like this to make this right angle. And I just kind of usually finger press that a little bit like that. And then then you fold it down back over to go the direction that you want to go next. And so this is about right. Getting everything situated again, back into the machine. And away we go. Okay, the camera's in a bad angle spot for me to manipulate the quilt, so hopefully I can do this. I'm so glad I waited to do this with the little quilt, because I thought about doing this with a big quilt before, and I actually shot a complete video once and I thought it went pretty good, and only to find out later that I had some problems with the camera, so I could never post it anyway. So I'm trying it again, and hopefully. A lot of people, if your machine has the option, prefer to use a walking foot when they do this. And so if your machine has the option of having a walking foot, you can certainly use it. I am sewing with a FOF, and in general, FOFs generally don't need a walking foot like as much as other machines need a walking foot, or at least that's what I was told at some point. Okay, here we're coming up to the corner again, so we're getting things straight. We're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to stop about 1/4 inch or so, and we're going to take the quilt out. And I'm manipulating this around, and I'm going to fold back and get that right angle and kind of finger press that down. And then I'm going to fold this piece back and head the direction that I need to go again. Okay, and slide this over, put this into the machine. Get this all straightened out, ready to go again. If you don't have as much experience working with a sewing machine, you might want to pin your binding down. That's totally okay. You can totally do that. As I said before, I've been sewing for a long, long time, so I don't often use pins. Okay. Get this situated again. I'm finding little pieces of fuzz. Okay. Before long, we'll be coming up to our next corner. And we're going to treat that corner just like we've treated all the other corners. I'm going to take it out. Get the thread loose here. Manipulate this back, turn it back. We're going to make that right angle there that I finger press down. We're going to turn this down so that we're ready to go back down the new direction we need to go. Slide that under the machine. Oh, I should have straightened my threads because my threads are all bunched up now. Okay, but that's okay. You're getting the idea. That's the main part. Okay. All right, I'm gonna have to go back and clip these threads that got bunched up. I should have straightened them, but I forgot. So here we go down the side again. We're just doing the same thing. We're folding this in half. If you don't already have this pressed, like I don't. If you want to know how I did some of these little letters, you can watch my Sew with Jo number 7. I did do a baby quilt for Georgia that had, it's a bigger version of this that looks very similar and uses the same style of I will be probably doing a video coming up that will show how to do the letters, each of them. Okay. And this corner gets the same treatment all the other corners have been getting. Okay, so we're just folding back, doing that finger press, folding back down the direction we need to go, making sure this is all good. This is so much easier without a camera right here in my way. And I keep bumping it. I'm so sorry that it's probably wiggling for you. But like I said at the beginning, I was going to try to do the best I could with making the video. Okay, we're on the last side, and we don't want to meet up with. We're just going to sew this far. And I'm going to show you where we're at. This is the beginning here, and this is the ending here. I'm going to clip these threads so that we can move around a little bit more. And now I'm going to show you how I join the two pieces. So I'm going to take this, and this is the beginning piece. I'm going to lay that down like this, and I'm going to put a pin here. Okay. Now I'm taking the very, very tail end of the binding, and I'm laying it right on top. You can see, you know, I'm making kind of like a sideways letter T. And I'm laying it right on top of that pin. I'm going to take another pin, and I'm going to pin this down again. So I've got two pins there on top of each other. I'm going to take another pin. I'm going to pin over here. So I have one piece pinned down in two places like that. Now I am going to get this to lay out as flat as I can. You know, push the edges down, and I'm going to take the binding that I was sewing down that still has a tail end on it, and I'm going to lay that over where I had pinned the piece down. Now this is going to tell me where my cut line is. Right across here is my cut line, and that's where I'm going to cut my binding. And this is where I'm going to have a terrible time getting a scissors in here because the camera is exactly in the way of where I need the scissors to be. So I made a little snip, and now I'll just make this cut. And that was pretty good considering I had no space to work. Okay, so now I'm going to take these pins out, and I'm going to take that piece out. And now I have the two pieces that are going to overlap and connect. Now to do that, we need to open them up and make sure we have right sides together like this, and we're going to put them together. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to put a pin here. They meet up and they go together to make this shape. This is kind of hard to explain. So what I'm going to do, let's put one more pin in here, and I'm going to take this, I'm going to manipulate the quilt around, and I'm going to sew from, you can see that back corner there and to this corner here. I gotta make sure everything's as bestly placed as it can be. Bestly, I don't know if that's a word. Probably not. I think best is the word all by itself. Okay, so here I go across. Okay. That's kind of an odd angle and way to sew, but just hang with it. It's okay. I'm going to trim that thread. I'm going to pull these pins out. And yes, I do run over pins. I'm not picky about that. I know some people are super picky about that, and if you are, just remove the pins, and if you aren't, just do it the way you want to do it. Okay, so again, this is just terribly hard with the camera in the way, and I know this looks very awkward as I'm doing this, but it's not awkward. It's not as awkward when I don't have the camera in the way. Okay, so I'm going to lay this back out again, and I'm going to check how everything looks. Okay, you can see that everything looks like it's going to lay down. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to finger press this open. On a regular day, I'd probably take this to the iron and open it, but I'm just going to make a good strong finger press here and call it good for today because I have the camera and I'm filming and I don't want to be up and down and do all that. So trying to get the quilt back situated into the machine, and we're just going to finish off sewing this on. Okay, and make sure this all gets situated in here and that seams actually stay open. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, and I run over a little bit further than I need to, and then I'm going to clip these threads. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to start sewing the quilt down, or everything's together. You can see we made it past our joiner. Oh, I got a thread here. This wasn't as smooth as I would like to. The camera got in the way, to be perfectly honest. It's just super, super hard to manipulate this in the couple inches that it takes. So I'm just going to start by turning this over. If you want, you can go around and pin the whole thing down if you want. I am not going to do that for A, time's sake, and B, I don't normally do that anyway. So the trick to this is you can see this spot right here. That's where we're going to end up sewing. And so we need to make sure this is flipped over far enough so that this will cover up the spot that we're going to sew, because we're going to blindly sew this down. So you just can kind of feel, I can feel if I sew here that it's going to catch about right here on the back side. So we're sewing from the top, and we can't see where we're sewing on the back, which is a little frustrating, as well as I'm talking with a pin in my mouth, and I have to try to rethread this machine, and I can't get my face very close because once again the camera's in the way. This too shall pass. So I'm going to throw a pin in here just to hold it in place for me to start. Okay, so I'm going to put that pin down. Okay, I'm going to move my hand out of the way a little bit and get that pin out of there. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit more. Okay, so we have to turn this over so that this is on the back. And while it's there, we have to slowly sew right in the ditch. This is not a speedy process, but it is much faster than hand sewing. And if you went around and pinned this down, it probably would be a little bit faster, depending on how often you do this. I've been on a roll lately and have finished lots of quilts, and so I have not been pinning it down. But I do, you just kind of manipulate this and wiggle your fingers and get that in place so that you know that when you stitch here, it's still going to catch in the back. Because I can feel here and I can feel it's going to catch in the back. I know I've told you this 1,000 times, but this is just terribly awkward with the camera in the way. There's going to be a time or two that you might get a little bit onto the binding, and there are worse things in life that we could worry about. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. But if you just are slow and careful, okay, once I get closer to the corner, I'm going to clip my thread from before, and I'm going to start to situate my corner so it's ready when I turn. And now I do pin. I usually put in, probably 2 or 3 pins to get me turned. And this is what I do for the corner. The direction I'm turning, I use that and make that to be the point. It will naturally just do this, make that angle there. And I try to keep that as straight as I can, fold that back and kind of manipulate like that. And you can see that I'm going to have that mitered corner there. And so I'm going to put the pin in here like that. Okay. I hope you can see that pretty good. And I'm going to look at the top. The top looks pretty good. And so now that that's all pinned in place and ready to go, I can work my way into the corner. Okay, now I'm going to lift up and turn and try to manipulate the quilt without bumping the camera too much. I don't want to make anybody seasick with a wiggly camera. I always need to remember to come back and get this pin out of the back. Here you can get kind of a sneak peek on how the corner went. Not too bad. I think deciding to machine bind, some people I know, they will never, ever, ever machine bind. I know that they enjoy hand binding. Oops, that pin in place kind of threw me off. That bobbling over on the binding like that, that does not bother me at all. I am not a perfectionist. I am so much more a person who just likes to quilt and not make quilting be stressful. Some of you I know would just cringe over how I quilt. My seams don't always lay flat. Yeah, some people would just cringe, including my own daughter. But I still make very lovely quilts, and I think that's all that matters. And I am not looking to win any large competition with my quilts. I know some people will purposely stitch with like, you can see that I machine quilted this with white thread, and so they will use white thread on the top because they think that that would blend and look more natural. I don't. I know some people that cut a whiter binding and then they sew, like, if you cut a whiter binding, some people, then they'll sew right here rather than right in the ditch. They'll sew like 1/8 of an inch off. And you have to just do whatever makes you happy and what makes you feel content with your quilting. I am the very, very last person in the world to want to be anyone that polices anyone else's work. That is not me and not my style. I want everybody to do whatever makes them happy when they're quilting. There's a lot of people I know that put this binding on the back side and then they bring it over, they flip it over to the top. Again, you can see I'm getting ready to turn. I put a couple pins in there, and now I'm coming up here to straighten out my corner. And I'm trying to do the same technique I did before. You can see that my corner there is mitered. A little bit of manipulating it to get it to lay right. Okay, and we're going to pivot here. And I'm going to try to get this quilt manipulated around again. Okay, I'm going to go back and pull this pin out. I don't know how many times that I have forgot that pin and then went out to hang up the quilt and then been stabbed by that pin when I went to hang up the quilt to take pictures of it. Okay. Here I go, still trying to work around this camera. I can do a, I was worried I got off there, but I didn't. I can probably do like a queen size quilt and bind it, machine bind it like this in probably about, I don't know, I would say 1.5 hours, maybe an hour. And that is from start to finish. That means cutting the binding strips to being completely finished. I had to laugh when I showed this quilt. Some people said that they considered it almost baby quilt size, and I was considering it just a doll quilt. But we're going to clip the threads here. I'm going to start getting it ready again to turn that corner. I have some cute little fairy fabric on the back. I think this is a fabric a blog reader sent me. And I had kind of thought I was going to fussy cut the fairies out. No, I don't, maybe this wasn't. I think this was a fabric I got and was going to make pillowcases for the childcare kids, actually. Okay, so I've got some pins in place. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to do this corner. And just the same method I was doing before. And the same method you would use if you were hand binding. And just get that corner flipped over in there like that to create the mitered corner. And I'm going to put a pin in here like that. And so that we should be ready to sew. Whoops. I'm going to turn this over. Okay. I think I'm going to slide this pin out because it's kind of rumpling it up a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to turn. I first heard about doing this, I think maybe Judy at Patchwork Times did this one time. I did a blog post about it and I thought, wow, that would be awesome. I used to machine bind before that, but I would sew my binding to the back and flip it over onto the top. But I like this better because it looks a little bit more like a traditional binding. And I'm sure some of you are wondering how it looks. And so I'm going to show you here. Can you see how it's looking on the back? And I guess I'm pretty content with how that looks. And I'm pretty content that my stitching is okay. Like I said, this isn't for everyone. Some people would not like that. I actually really prefer myself the machine binding because, long ago when my boys were little, right now they're 31 and 28. I did some hand binding on a quilt, and even at that point, I had done a lot of quilting. And when I did the hand binding, my boys were like 8 and 11 when I made quilts for them. And I made both of them a flag quilt, and they kind of had a patriotic themed room. And I hand sewed the binding down, but boys are boys and they're rough on things, and their bedding frequently needed to be washed. And so the binding came up when I hand sewed it. And so I prefer the machine binding over the hand binding, just for the washability of it. Sometimes I have to flip it over like this, and because it's not laying quite right when I just flip it on the top. I think the machine stitching is stronger than the stitching that I do, and it's more dense than what I do when I hand bind. So I am very content with machine binding for that reason too, just because I do think it's a little bit easier or a little bit sturdier. Sorry. Okay, this is where we started, so we're getting to the end, guys. Yahoo! Okay, I'm going to throw some pins in here. Oh, I got threads to clip first. Oops, and then I bumped the camera. I would especially recommend, if you are doing a quilt that you're gifting to charity, that you would consider learning to machine bind, simply because you just don't know what situation that the quilts are going into. They probably are going to be, they possibly could be used and more heavily. For example, if a quilt is going to a homeless shelter, it could be used all day long versus just in the evening. It could be used as a coat. If a quilt's going to a child, children still throw up and still have accidents at night causing quilts to be washed more often. So I just think it's a good idea to for me personally, I prefer to machine bind because of those, especially if I'm doing a charity quilt. Okay, so I'm at the corner and I'm going to rotate again, and we're coming up to the end where we are going to meet up with where we started. I'm going to remember to get that pin out. Here you can see how the corner looks. It's not perfect, but it's not bad at all. I'm content with how that looks. And as I said, I know some people, that's not precise enough for them, and that's totally okay. It's precise enough for me. And I gotta see where I started. Oh, right here is where I started. Maybe tell how much further I go. So, with that, our little quilt is bound. I'm gonna clip my thread, clip my other thread, and I'm going to pop it out over here. I'm going to get the camera off of here, and I'll stop the camera, and then I'll do a video and show you, add a video on here and show you how it looks in the end. Okay, here I am back with the quilt. It's all finished. Giving you a little scan of how it looks. But the thing that we're mostly here for is to check out the binding, aren't we? So let's do that. Here you can see how the corner looks. And as I said, I'm content with that. Here you can see how it looks along the back side. And here you can see how it looks along the front side. I guess for me, the time that it saves me to machine bind like this is worth it. This is good enough for me. As I said, if you're doing a show quilt, obviously you wouldn't want to use this technique. But if you're just doing it for your pleasure or something to gift to charity, I think that machine binding is an excellent way to make the most of your quilting time. And I'm so happy I finally got this video shot. It's been hanging over my head for a long time. So, yahoo! Hopefully you can see, and hopefully everything is good. Keep watching for another edition of Sew with Jo, and I'll do a little bit more and show you how to do the letters. I think some of you are expecting to have a full tutorial with cutting sizes and things like that, but it's just not going to happen because that's not the way these letters work. They're totally free form and totally fun. So with that, happy birthday to my granddaughter, Georgia. There is your birthday present. Bye.